Hey music fans and aficionados, experts and beginners, welcome to Music Makers Academy. I want to do a little video on memorization. I've written a blog post, you can find it on the website, with a lot of detail. But some people just learn better, with this kind of a way, and it's not unusual for musicians to be audio learners. So I just want to put some of that information on a quick video that you hopefully get some benefit from, and you might want to go look at that blog post to really put it together and have something that you can take with you. So the whole thing about memorizing, I described in my blog post how I've known a lot of great musicians. I've been very fortunate in my life. I've known some extraordinary people and known them as friends, and we're able to just kind of drink a beer and just say, but really, how is that for you? And I remember these two pianists that were working together in this ensemble, and I would go to their shows and stuff, and it was a 2-piano, 2-percussion group, and they were awesome, and they played all this 20th century music, and they commissioned composers, and they were really fantastic, and these two were really fantastic pianists. The percussionists were awesome too, but these two pianists were closer to my heart because I've always played piano also, so I've had lessons with one of those two, and so I would talk to them after concerts and stuff, and the subject of memorization came up, and I was talking to this one pianist, and she said, listen, if you can't play the piece without the music in front of you, you don't know the piece. And I thought, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then another day, a couple of weeks later, I happened to be talking to the other pianist in this group, another really excellent, fine musician and fabulous person and good friend, who I actually took some lessons with. I took a whole season of lessons with him. And I said, memorization. He said, memorization, playing things in a concert from memory, is just kind of a trick or like a circus trick that the romantic performers like Liszt and Paganini would do this stuff, they do this incredible virtuosic music and completely from memory, like it's just part of the show, just kind of like a circus performer or something, right? Just to impress an audience. And he said, really, it doesn't make any difference to serious listeners. Like if you have a great recording of the Beethoven sonatas, do you care whether they were playing it for the music or not? Like, does it make any difference? And I thought, well, that makes sense too, and never really resolved it. But for me, memorizing was always not available. And although I played piano my whole life, trombone's been my main professional outlet, and nobody expects you to memorize anything on the trombone, certainly not in the classical world. In fact, when I was studying orchestral music in university, my teacher warned me about memorization because you're often playing, short, just a few bars of an orchestral excerpt, and that's the thing that you're studying. That's what you're going to have to play for an orchestral audition to get an orchestra job. But because they're short, and because you play them a lot, and you listen a lot, and you study the scores and stuff, after a while you just know them. I actually had a lesson with a guy from the Chicago Symphony, which was really awesome, and I didn't know what we were going to do. And I didn't have any music in the room, and he just started naming excerpts, and I just played them, and I didn't even know I had that much music memorized. It was kind of amazing. But my teachers at that time were saying, be careful about memorizing because you don't want to get so far off the page you start coming up with your own version of it. So look at the page, make sure you're playing on everything that's on the page, that you're making the dotted note short, and you're playing full value, and you're playing the dynamics and everything, right? And certainly as an orchestral player, you're not going to play much, if anything, from memory. You're going to be looking at the page and counting your rests and coming in the right place. Maybe some people are going to play from memory, but it's pretty unusual. You're playing from the printed page. And then the professional life of an orchestral player or a classically trained freelancer, which is mostly my life, is a reading gig. You show up and you have to read things well the first time. And there's plenty of musicians that do things, and everything is from memory, like pop musicians and jazz musicians. And oftentimes they would tell me that they envied my reading ability. And I go, oh, I guess, But still in the back of my mind, it bothered me that there was very little music that I could play from memory. And the few things that I could play from memory, I really valued, And sometimes I would decide, okay, I'm going to memorize this big piano. I'm going to memorize the first movement of the Beethoven sonata or something. And little kids do it. I should be able to do it. Man, it was so hard, so tedious, and then wouldn't really stick. I had the first few bars memorized, and then it was downhill from there. So it finally occurred to me, maybe I should ask someone who knows, who Who do I know that plays a lot of music from memory and memorizes pieces like nobody's business? My partner, Jennifer, the other half of Music Makers Academy is Jennifer Buston, this awesome classical violinist. She plays all kinds of music from memory. You know, pages and pages and pages of complex music. So I said, Jen, how do you memorize, right? And so she told me. And I tried it, and it worked. It's amazing. And it's really fun. Now, the decision about whether you're going to perform from memory is very individual. And in certain contexts, like you're not going to see, you very rarely see a musician go on stage in front of an orchestra, say a pianist or violinist or a cellist and play a solo with printed music in front of them. It does happen, but it's pretty unusual. Usually people who decide that that's the life they want, they know that that's part of the deal, and they're just going to do whatever it takes to memorize that music. And it's harder for some people than others, no question. But in terms of your own musical life, do you have any music that's memorized? Is it an important thing to do? Is that something that you would like to do? I would say yeah, like it feels really good to have something memorized. Okay, so here are the steps that Jen described for me. There's 12, well, really 11 steps, we'll say 12. Number 1, start at the beginning, pick a bite-sized, digestible amount of music. It might be the whole first phrase, or it might be the first bar, or it might be the first 4 notes, depending on the complexity of the music. You're probably going to start by listening to recordings of this piece because you're learning the piece here. You're really, truly learning the piece, it's not a separate thing. This is how you learn a new piece. You start by memorizing it. That's step 1. Although you might say step 1 is listening to the piece and just looking at the music going by and really getting to know what this piece is going to sound like. And you can work with the recording directly while you're doing this process. So you pick that first phrase that seems like, okay, that should be doable. Like maybe you say, I don't know if I can memorize this whole piece, but surely I can memorize this 1 bar or this first 4 bars or this, this first beat, depending on the complexity of the music. So you play it. You look at the music and you play it on your instrument. And with the intention is that I'm memorizing right now. And that's important. You're thinking, I'm doing this in order to memorize this piece. So I'm memorizing. And then you might want to do that again. Play it again, memorizing, and then turn away. Maybe if you're playing the piano, most instruments using your hands, maybe playing the violin, look at your hands, play the piece, play that piece, that much of the music. How would that go? Was it correct? Did it feel right? If so, play it again. Piano, trombone, whatever you play it again. Say, yeah, that was good. You might want to look back at the music and just double check that was correct. And at this stage in the journey, you want it to be all of it. You want the pitches to be right, of course, the right notes, the rhythms to be right, the articulations, whatever fingerings you're learning, where your breath marks are going to be, the phrase, the whole sense of what this music is about, the full finished performance, although it might be at a slower tempo, and that's a good idea. Jennifer says you might want to have a metronome on while you're doing this, and it might well be slower than the finished tempo. That's fine, but in every other way, it should be the full meal deal. Do not fall into the trap of thinking, well, I'm going to learn the notes first, and then I'll add the expression later. That's not actually possible, because you can't play with no expression. You can just play with bad expression or the wrong expression. You can't play with no articulation. You can't play without a note length. But you can learn the wrong note lengths, or you can learn the right ones. So the idea is to start off with the full music that you want with this first phrase and memorize those first few notes. And then part 2. You're going to play the phrase, as I said, including all those details. That's really part 2. I'm looking at my notes for my blog post. Part 3 is play it again if you think you need to. Turn away from the page, look at your hands, play the phrase from memory. Okay, so I said all that already. If it didn't go well, if that just didn't work, then it's probably too big a chunk. You thought, I can do that whole first 4 bars. Maybe not. Maybe the first 2 bars. Maybe the first bar. Make it bite-sized. You're not going to get through this meal by taking in more than you can chew. Bite off a bite-sized chunk. So go back, pick a shorter amount, do that process again, memorize that first thing. For sure you can do that. You can memorize the first 3 notes. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the next phrase, but we're going to hook it. So we're going to take the last few notes of that first little bit that you memorized and start with those few notes and add the next bar or beat or 4 bars or whatever is a bite-sized chunk in this piece. And you're going to do the same process. You're going to look at the music, play it carefully with the intent to memorize, and then look away, play it from memory, including those few notes you've hooked from the previous phrase. And again, if that doesn't work, you might do that again. But if it's just like, okay, this isn't working, then you need to pick a smaller amount. But hopefully by now you're starting to figure out what's the right, what's a bite-sized chunk for you. So that makes sense. So we're going to continue. But here's the interesting and scary part, and this is what makes this method so special. So far, none of this seems like particularly, revolutionary. But this method is revolutionary. At least for me it was. And I suspect if you're someone like me who's not great at memorizing, you're going to be pretty happy with this. But here's the step that's so crazy and a little bit scary. And it's a step that's not a step. It's a step that you're not going to do. And that is, you're not going to go back to the beginning. You're not going to play that first phrase again. You're done. You've already memorized it. And you're like, what? I know I'm forgetting it. Even as I sit here, it's dribbling away. No. You're just going to go on to the next phrase, do the same process. You're going to do it as I described, look at it, read it with an intent to memorize, look away, look at your hands, play it from memory, maybe check it, maybe do that a couple of times, but then you can say, okay, that's memorized, and then you're going to look at the next bit, hook a bit of that last phrase you just learned to the next phrase, and continue, and you're never going to go back and start again from the beginning. You're not going to go back to the beginning. It's crazy. And then if you're doing a short piece, you might finish that in one sitting, and then we can talk about what happens then. But more typically, you're doing a longer project, and you may not finish this project in one sitting. So you mark on your page where you got to, and then the next day you start at the beginning? No, you don't. You start where you left off. You do not go back to the beginning. This is crazy, right? It's so crazy. It's so crazy it might work. It's actually awesome. You just start where you left off and work on that. Do not go back to the beginning. Do not review. Start where you left off. Learn that new phrase where you are, halfway down the page. Hook it on to the next one. Continue until you get to the end of the piece. When you get to the end of the piece, and I'm abandoning my numbers now because my numbers don't work for my speaking, but hopefully the numbers are useful to you to break it down if you're going to look at the printed version of this. When you've gone to the very end of the piece, then you go back and read it again. From the very beginning, play the whole piece reading to reacquaint yourself with it. And then you turn away and you attempt to play the entire piece from memory. And you may well go, oh, I totally forgot that next bar is. You can look and go, oh yeah, back to playing from memory. You might have to look again, and you get to the whole piece primarily by memory. And then you can do it again, and you might find that there's that one whole phrase that just, you have to read it. So that's the phrase you have to go back and kind of redo that process with that one phrase. But you're primarily now working from memory. If the piece is big enough that it took more than one sitting to do, chances are it's going to really benefit from this next step. If it's a short little ditty, like a simple melody, it may not need this. But if it's a longer piece, or just complex enough, it can really benefit from dividing the piece up into obvious compositional sections. So those might be 8 bars or 16 bars or something like that. You can say, well, here's where it goes into the minor key, or here's where it goes back to the original melody, like the beginning. Structural places that make sense. And then, and put, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or A, B, C, D letters, or something like you would do in a rehearsal score, except you're going to put a number at the very beginning, which you don't normally do for rehearsal numbers. And then you can practice those sections in reverse order or random orders, but not from the beginning. And Jennifer says, when you're in this process and you don't feel solid, you don't feel like, yeah, I'm ready to perform this piece, but you have gone through that first big process, and now you want to solidify this process, do not start at the beginning. Start with one of your sections. And I personally really like starting and working backwards. Do the last section and its completion, and do the second last section, third last section, and the first section, and do all 4 or 5, 8, however number of sections you've come up with. And you might find over time that you can combine some of those sections into bigger sections, because now you don't need so many small sections, because they're making more sense. And you can take those last 2 or 3 sections and just make that into one big chunk. And you might end up with only 2 or 3 or 4 sections. And those are also useful signposts when you're performing. If you do get lost or lose your place, you know, I know where this is. You can recognize some of those signposts. And so that's it. That's memorizing. And I can tell you that it really worked for me. It was just a revelation, because I've never been able to memorize. And I actually started with a really hard piece, quite a complex piece, and it worked. I was able to memorize it, and I immediately went to another. I memorized 2 more pieces in a rapid succession. Now, it is painstaking, and it does take a certain amount of concentration and time to do it. It's not something you just toss off, but obviously you get better at the process the more pieces you work this way. But you're not just memorizing, you're actually deeply learning the piece. As I said, you're not just learning the notes, you're learning everything about this piece. And hopefully working with recordings to do that. So I hope that's useful to you. I'm very interested in how the essential point, or what makes this method works, how that would apply to music that isn't on the printed page. Because we're talking expressively about printed music. How do you take printed music off the page and not need the page? But what if you're learning, like, say you're doing a jazz transcription, if you're trying to learn a pop tune or something like that? Is there a way to do that more effectively than maybe we're currently doing it? Jazz transcriptions can be very, very time consuming. A lot of people don't do it. And again, there's lots of people that are very good at just absorbing a ton of information, and you can just play back reams and reams of transcriptions. Is there a difference in their actual method, and is it related to this? So that, stay tuned. Give it a try and let me know how that works out for you. I'm going to try it too, and we can compare notes. Thanks everyone. Talk to you soon.